Most of the time I spend working out in the barn is after farm hours in the evening. So it's been top priority for me from the very beginning to install good lighting in the barn. It's not much fun working in a poorly lit shop. The first lights I wanted to get installed were under the loft area. I picked up 7 dome fixtures in town. I'm not entirely sure what they're called actually. I've also heard them called barn lights, which is very appropriate. I always have a really hard time figuring out where the lights should go, but once I settled on the layout, I cut down some boards for the lights to hang on. I want the lights to be as tight to the rafters as possible. I don't want them hanging down low, where I'd constantly be knocking them. I also wanted to run all the wire in conduit. Since it's going to be exposed, I thought I would keep it a little cleaner and make it look nice. I just cut the conduit with a cutoff wheel on the angle grinder. And I found out that a pair of pliers does a pretty good job cleaning out the burrs left from cutting it. Seems to me that that sharp edge on the conduit could cut through the wire over time. So I tried to smooth it up as much as possible. I had to tighten down all the electrical boxes so I could measure the distance between them for the conduit. And then once I cut the conduit, I unscrewed one of the electrical boxes and slid the conduit in place. I wanted the switch for the lights to be in the middle of the run, which made it a little bit more complicated. I had to run 3-wire from the first bulb to the switch, and then from the switch on is 2-wire. I was originally going to put the switch over by the door with the rest of the switches, but I have 6 switches there already, and I know exactly what everyone does because I installed each of them. But anyone else that walks into the barn is going to have a heck of a time figuring out which switch does what. I use a spacer and some conduit clamps to help keep things in place. I think these fixtures are usually meant to hang down from the ceiling on a long cord, which looks really nice, but it wasn't going to work underneath the loft area. I actually attached the canopy directly to the light fixture, just to minimize the space. As I was wiring up the lights, it started getting a little nasty outside. It's windy and rainy. It's kind of fun being in the barn listening to it. Drake's usually waiting outside for me to throw the ball, and he didn't want to leave the barn. The big part of the reason why I built this overhang up in the loft area was I thought it'd be a great way to install 2 lights right over the welding table underneath it. I spend most of my time working at the welding table, and so I really want it lit up nice so I can see what the heck I'm doing, see how bad my welds are. Once I had all the lights installed, I moved on to installing the light switch. It has the one runner going back to the first light bulb, which lets me install the switch in the middle of the run. And the last thing to do was to get it wired into the electrical box. I always get excited when the first bulb works. I bought some fancy LED bulbs I was a little unsure about because they were quite a bit more expensive, but they put out nice light. I was happy with the color. And Drake really liked the boxes. I got the last bulb screwed in, and that was it. This corner of the barn is finally lit up. About a year ago, I bought 6 high bay metal halide lights off of Craigslist for the peak of the barn. They were the right price, but I just haven't been that happy with them. For one, they take about 5 minutes to turn on, which isn't that big of a deal if you're coming out to work for the whole night. But if you're just coming out to the barn to grab something real quick, I don't even bother turning them on because I know I'm going to be able to rummage around and find what I'm looking for in the dark before the lights will actually come to full brightness. They also hum really loud, which is another thing that probably shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it's grown to bug the crap out of me for some reason. And lastly, they give off kind of a green tone to their light. I'm not sure how much it shows up on the video, but it's just not the nicest light to be working in. I decided to go ahead and switch them out for some high bay LED UFO lights, which I've been reading a lot about and seem to be getting good reviews on Amazon. These lights that I went with had 3 different options for wattages, and I opted for the middle of the range 200 watts. I've always been happy with the amount of light the metal halide lights put out, and I hope the LED lights would put out just as much. When I went to hang the lights, I found out that my extension ladder wasn't long enough. The lights are 25 feet off the floor. Didn't quite know what I was going to do, but then I had the idea of adding an extension to the extension ladder, which I think is why they're called extension ladders. It taped up really good. I wanted to make sure it's good and safe. And then I climbed up to swap out the light. Okay, maybe not. I decided to play it safe and rent a nice tall 30-foot ladder from town. Mom, that was just a joke about the extension ladder, I promise. The metal halide lights have plugs on them, so I could just easily unplug them and lower them down to the ground with a rope. I was actually able to reuse the plug and get it installed on the new LED high bays, and then I raised them back up and got them installed. It surprised me how quick this went because they just went right back on the same hook and I plugged them back in the same way. It didn't take too long at all. And man, they were bright. After plugging in the first one, I was no longer worried about them not being as bright as the metal halide lights. I think I was almost more concerned about them being too bright. It was great. It was almost like daylight in there. I think Drake was a little worried about me up on the ladder. He'd follow me from the ground to the loft to the upper part where the deck is and keep an eye on me. Before I knew it, I was on the last light, and when I unplugged it, silence. No more humming. More than I even thought it would. It really changed how the barn felt at night, not having that humming. It's just calm and peaceful out there now. It doesn't sound like the barn's next to a giant power plant anymore. And the color was so much better. It's just a white, nice light. Really made it easy to see what you're working on. versus the old lights, which maybe feel a little hungover. I'll put links below to the lights I bought if you want to check them out. I don't mean for this to sound like an ad. I'm just really excited to have finally gotten the lights installed underneath the loft and to swap out the metal halide lights for some much better LED ones. Instantly on. See that?